Got too much gain there? We'll call the Solid Waste Management Authority, the City of Crescent City and the County of Del Norte, State of California, to order. Only those items that indicate a specific time will be heard at this assigned time. All items may be taken out of sequence to accommodate public and staff availability. Commissioner Hawley, would you please lead us in the pledge? Okay, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, Commissioner Hawley. Meeting is called to order, so we'll first entertain with public comments. Anybody who has something to say? All right. If it's on the agenda, I'll ask you to, is it an agenda item? Then we'll have it spoken at the time of the agenda, because this will be your one and only opportunity to speak if the item is on the agenda. Is your item that you wish to address on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll address it.
I understand the public can speak both as public comment and then as items are taken up.
Well, no, you're going to get one opportunity to speak on the agenda item.
Am I being treated differently?
No. If you wish to speak on an agenda item, this will be your opportunity to speak. But when it comes to the agenda item, when it comes up again, we'll respectfully decline your opportunity to speak at that time. So which time do you want to take?
That's fine. I'll speak right now in case I have to leave. I just thought you might be disappointed if I didn't get up, so I thought I'd get up.
I don't know how to contain my emotion on that.
Okay. Well, actually, I'm here to ask you that you do not repeal the authority ordinances that have the repeal that's been recommended by the local task force. And you, as city and county, county rep isn't here, I'm sure you don't want to end up regulating the collection and disposal of solid waste, which may happen if you take away the authority's ability and authority to do so by rescinding the ordinances. And I think that you also may prevent a possible revenue stream by which the county and city can be reimbursed for acting for the authority when carrying out the ordinances. I don't really see a purpose to rescind the ordinances. It's not clear. And it appears, in my eyes, to be another fixing of something that isn't broken and keeping the staff from taking action and looking at some more pressing matters. If there's duplication and confusion with the ordinances that hamper their effectiveness, why not amend them or remove the sections that are confusing? I find the ordinances in reading them to be very thorough, well-written, well-researched. People took a lot of time. It was only in 2008. I can't see that things have changed that much. In fact, with the new mandatory recycling for commercial businesses and for multi-unit dwellings, you have a framework already in especially 2008-1 where you can add and change what you need to put in those stipulations as you start kind of easing into those mandatory regulations. So anyway, I would hope that you would not take action to rescind them. And my last point is I think the timing's also very poor with a pending report from R3 who will be taking a look at everything, and there may be things that need to be changed then. So I really think this is not a good time to take action. So thank you.
Just state your name for the record because we didn't get that before.
Carried away, I forgot. I'm still Elizabeth Henry,
yes,
and
indeed.
I still live in the county.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Any other comments either on or off the agenda at this time? So we'll move on, and we'll move to the report from Del Norte Solid Waste Task Force. Wes Nunn, please identify yourself and give us your report. Thank you.
Wesley Nunn, county resident and task force chairman. First, we lost Karen Sanders as a task force member. She was assigned after her plate was too full, had a lot of commitments, and I'm not sure of the procedure right at this moment as far as if we need to replace her, if we need to advertise for the position, whatever the proper I think that is for the authority to do as far as placing the ad and going forth with that. Second, we did pass a motion, and you can see it with your paperwork, passed 3-2 in favor of repealing the ordinances, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. The draft minutes are just those, they're draft minutes. There's a few corrections, but for the most part, they're pretty accurate. Right now, the authority is not in the business of picking up trash. That is done by Recology, and the authority is also not in the business of hauling the trash to White City. That's done by Hambros. And personally, I'm not sure why the authority should be in the business of blight enforcement. That's just my personal input there. On a third note, as a task force, we did a tally vote of what our goals were beyond what's mandated. And the first one is to ask the authority itself what they would like to see us focus on. So I'm just letting you know that we're looking for input and suggestion as to the focus for the task force. And that concludes the report right now. Any questions?
As a point of correction, I think it's important that everybody understand that the authority absolutely has a role in terms of collections, in that we manage the collections contract, and those service standards are set by the authority. Similarly, we have a direct relationship to the operations of the transfer station, as is Hambro Waste Solutions Group is also a contractor of the authority and operates under the provisions of that agreement.
Point taken, but I think you understand my point, is that even though overseeing it, you're not directly in the business right now. My understanding is that the authority or director of the authority wants to take calls for blight control and act on those calls, although the same is not done for pickup or for hauling trash to White City. Those are immediately forwarded to the proper Recology and Hambros entities. That's my point. So.
And one other point I'm noticing here, Wes, and looking through our past notes, that this is not the first time you've made a recommendation to repeal ordinances. I'm looking at a memo September 25th, 2012 from the local task force, including Commissioner Wilson, of a similar recommendation. This is going back a little over a year ago, September 12th. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay. So anything dramatically changed? You wanted to add anything from here? Because I don't think your report came with these recommendations. Your recent recommendation to rescind ordinances have not come with these recommendations, but this is from 2012. Are you standing by these then?
Yeah, I don't think they contradict. I think they include.
Commissioner Wilson?
They do. They are different.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Commissioner Wilson?
If I may go back and clarify, in the report that was given to the body of 10 back in September
Yes.
2012, it is a different recommendation. Should I go into that at this point?
No,
should
I think we'll do it during the discussion.
It was from the task force, and at that point, the task force had taken a motion to repeal, to recommend repeal of the 2008-02, which is the nuisance abatement. And again, then to move forward with the rest of the recommendation was to ask that the city and county would take into consideration some of the things that were in Ordinance 2008-01 and include those within their the city and the county ordinances. And then after they mirrored each other and some of the items were pulled out of the ordinance that Mr. Mason has used, that then at that point in time that then they would be repealed. But the task force had again asked the body to go back to the city and the county, and they had never met, and so that recommendation never was well, it didn't work. Nobody ever had a meeting and nothing ever got done. So it went back to the task force, and then at this point in time, and looking at the strategy that they put forward prior in 2012, they realized that it didn't work by asking to have the city and county create or update their ordinances. And so then at that point in time, the strategy was changed, and then at this last meeting, the recommendations were to repeal or rescind all of the ordinances that 2008, 01, 02, 03, and 2009, 01. So, so that it is a different recommendation that came out of the task force meeting last month than the one that was put in front in 2012. So it is different.
It is different, and I would tend to see the recent one as superseding the prior.
Okay, any other commissioners have any questions or comments for Wes Nunn?
Yes, I do. Hi, Wes.
Hi.
We're in receipt, of course, of your minutes, and we understand what you're asking. What I'm lacking, though, is any detail in that recommendation. In other words, I was kind of hoping for each major piece of the ordinance and maybe an explanation about how you considered it, why it was good, why it was bad, how it was repetitive or not repetitive. And I don't know.
Your microphone went off.
Do you have that kind of a documentation?
You lost your microphone.
Yeah, this thing is probably. Am I back on?
We can. I can agendize that for the next meeting and see what we can do.
Well, that's something that I would find helpful is some idea that you considered the relationship of landlords to their tenants to blight issues, and that kind of those things really don't exist anywhere else in either the city or county codes ordinances. And as I went through the 2008-01, mainly that particular ordinance 2008-01, it seems like there were multiple areas that weren't covered by either the city or the county. And I just wondered if you had considered those items and how they might be addressed.
We actually have some people on the task force and some people not on the task force who put an immense amount of time into studying all that. Mm-hmm. They created great log sheets comparing them. They were never finalized and never publicized, and they're actually the property of those persons.
Okay.
But they give a great amount of detail. I think Mary is probably one of the more familiar people with the differences.
Yeah. It just seems like we have a sweeping recommendation without any of the data behind it in front
Point
of us.
taken.
That's all I'm concerned about.
We'll discuss that and see what we can put into more detail at the next meeting. And I don't know if that has to be by motion vote. We'll just
it would be helpful to me. I don't know what the
Yeah.
pleasure is of the rest.
I did bring some backup data today when we get to that, that maybe might be helpful to you of what you're looking at for.
Okay, well, we can consider that. And
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thank you.
Oh, and any other comments? Former Chair Rich Ania, do you have any feedback? Okay. All right. Then having said that, thank you very much, Wes. We'll go on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Lonsdale, come on up. I'm sorry for not noticing your hand up there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Bill Lonsdale and I live in Crescent City. And I'm motivated by what has just transpired to raise an issue that I don't want to do to make trouble and I don't want to do to denigrate the efforts of Commissioner Wilson being very active in numbers of aspects of the waste management picture. But what we just heard was an important clarification from Commissioner Wilson. But in essence, Commissioner Wilson speaking on behalf of the task force as a member of the commission. And I just wonder whether we could ask County Council to address the issue of potential conflict of interest where Commissioner Wilson will be asked to vote on a recommendation made by the commission of which she is a part.
Point taken.
Thank you.
Martha?
This question, I believe, came up when Commissioner Wilson was selected to serve as a public member. There's nothing illegal about serving on both the Board of Commissioners and the Solid Waste Task Force, because the Solid Waste Task Force is an advisory board to this commission. There are times when serving on two boards would be considered incompatible, but in this case, I don't think that's true, and I think it is legally permissible to serve on both boards.
Mr. Lonsdale, does this satisfy you, sir? Okay. All right, are there any other public comments with relationship to Mr. Nunn's report? If you have something to say, come on up. If not, we'll move on to consent agenda. See no hands up. Okay, consent agenda, items 2.1 to 2.9. Do I have a motion to approve?
I would make a motion to approve, but I did want to talk briefly about item number 2.9, so.
2.9 will pull. So let's do this at this time. Any other commissioners wish to pull up any? Go ahead.
Actually, I need a very important clarification on 2.9, which is, I believe Karen has the claim that we revised. This contract for Bush Geotechnical was originally estimated at $3,300 to $3,600. The first notice that I received that they had gone over budget is when I received the invoice for $8,552. I'm not prepared to approve that invoice. However, I am prepared to acknowledge that they did complete the work to our satisfaction, and that they did do work that was beyond that which they had originally estimated. So I believe at the next meeting we'll probably come back with a change order and some additional amount that would be invoiced from them. But at this point in time, we're recommending approval of a claim of $3,600 to Bush Geotechnical rather than the $8,552 that appears on the agenda.
Okay, Commissioner Wilson, does that satisfy you?
Yeah, that was the issue, is they're more than twice of what their bid was, so, and they didn't ask for approval before they went out and spent the money, so.
So everybody's record is clear on this. This has to deal with the digging of the well?
It has to do with the geotechnical analysis associated with the digging of the 2 investigation wells out at the Crescent City landfill.
And so the 8,500 should actually be changed to 3,600 at this time?
3,600, that's correct. Even.
All right, so I'm going to defer to you, to Ted. Can we go ahead at this point and approve 2.1 to 2.9, amending that, or do we need a motion on this? Martha, do we need a motion to change the amount from 8,552.00 to 3,600 even?
No, I don't think we do, and I'll make a motion to approve items 2.1 through 2.9, and 2.9 being $3,600.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Karen, can you call the vote?
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes?
Commissioner Hawley,
Yes.
Commissioner Gitlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ania.
Yes?
Oh, sorry, Chairman Gitlin, I'm trying to get my timer fixed over here too as it goes off and get everybody's name.
Did we get all 4?
I got you.
All right, show the vote is 4-0. We jumped around a little bit, that's all right. So, okay, now we'll move on to item number 3, Director and Treasurer's Report. Ted, 3.1, Acting Director's Report.
Yes, I'll skip over those things that are covered later in the agenda or elsewhere, and I'll just highlight some of the other things that are mentioned here. I did, for the intending to distribute agendas a la the iPad, as the city and the county are currently doing. We did purchase an iPad, and I'm learning how to use that step by step. But those of you who are on email on your iPads could have hit the link, and you should already have access to them on the iPads. Commissioner Wilson has informed us that she prefers the printed agendas, and so we'll continue to deliver those as she wishes. I did prepare and submit a variety of information to R3. Included in there is a summary report of the activities of the former director as best as I was able to piece them together. I completed personnel performance reviews for our administrative assistant and 3 different site attendants. And I made phone calls looking into the possibility of developing a mural with a recycling theme, and I called both Lori Poole of Recology and Amber Talbert of the Building Healthy Communities Foundation. And unfortunately, nobody really has time to run with this project. So at this point in time, that project is not moving anywhere. I have been working with the administrative assistant, Isabel Valdez, regarding the $138,922 in deferred revenue, and I believe that we've taken that number way down. It's, I believe, below 4,000, probably below 2,000 at this point, but you'll see an updated report on that in the
Deferred
next
revenue or accounts receivable?
It's deferred revenue is how it's termed on the sheets, I believe.
Same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also scheduled and successfully completed a quarterly PCI compliance scan to assure that measures are in place to protect customer credit and debit card information. And then, although it did not make it into this report because it happened on the day that we were distributing the agendas, which was a challenging day, however, we did do a surprise cash count of the money that we have on hand, and it came out to the penny, according to our records. So that's one more fiscal control that's in place and working. Staff trainings with respect to FEMA requirements continue to be temporarily deferred because it takes many hours for each person to complete those, and it's been challenging to schedule. I did receive a call from Detective Barber of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, and he reported that he has completed his investigation into the authority's funds and records and submitted his report to his supervisor at the Sheriff's Office. I have not heard further from the Sheriff's Office in that regard. This next month, I anticipate installation of an additional security camera inside the transfer station scale house. I anticipate, based on an item we'll be discussing later, that I will be making an appearance before the City Council and the Board of Supervisors related to the Pledge of Revenue Agreement. We will have staff evaluations for for a gate attendant and an account clerk. And I'm hoping to get to the inspections of the certified oil recycling centers, which I have been deferring for several months in a row. So that's the overview of the director's reports, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ted, do we have the actual report from the Sheriff's Office?
We do not.
All right, so I'm looking at here at under 7.1, the discussion and possible action regarding writing off of bad debts.
Yes.
We don't have this complete yet. We don't have that report from the Sheriff's Office, do we?
We do not have the report from the Sheriff's Office. We only have our own records and those of the county.
Well, I'm going to ask the board if they wish to hear 7.1, and I'm going to go around and ask commissioners if you are in position to listen to 7.1 until and when and if we have the complete report from the Delaware County Sheriff's Department.
If you're asking me, my opinion, no. This is still confidential information, doesn't belong on our agenda until the report's complete.
Commissioner Wilson?
I think it would be prudent to wait on particularly the, yes.
Okay. Commissioner Hawley?
This one works. It seems to me that these bad debts go back to 2005-06, and I think it's mostly a matter of bookkeeping to try and get the books cleaned up. I don't think it'll interfere with the investigation at all.
I think in our confidential report that we have from Mr. Scanlon, he references that in his investigation, and I think we should not do anything until that report comes out from the Sheriff's Office investigator that talks about those years also.
Okay. I don't feel strongly
I don't see
either
a
way.
hurry in this.
Is there an importance for doing this right now?
Mostly I was, as the commissioners may recall, the original scope for R3 included an analysis of fiscal controls. And so this was part of my overarching report on responding to what fiscal controls are in place and how we best move forward. And so this is coupled with that investigation. But in terms of can we wait? Yes, we can wait.
Okay. I don't have any trouble waiting in that event.
And I would concur. I would say, under the circumstances, let's get our ducks in order. When we have the complete sheriff's report, I'd rather not delve into something sensitive as this is without having the complete report where all the commissioners can look at it. And so we'll pull 7.1 from the agenda, table it until the next meeting.
That's fine.
Can I make a comment?
Commissioner Wilson?
I was able, I know the commissioners might be able to see some of the information that was in 7.1 that was confidential, and to scan through that to see if they felt that there were any of those that are collectible. Because I was able to pull a few that I Ted has noted that I think are collectible. So if you just kind of go through and take a look at everyone that's listed.
So do you want to, well, I guess we voted on this. Do you?
Oh, yeah, for next time,
And again, this is really more cautionary than anything else. I'm a little reluctant about putting the cart before the horse. We really should have the sheriff's report. It should be into our eyeballs in a short period of time. And then certainly next month's meeting, we'll discuss it after we have the sheriff's report. So we'll move on. And I think that's you, Mr. Taylor, Treasurer's Controller Report for December 2013. Come on up and put a microphone on you so we can all hear.
In October, there was $198,000 payment that solid waste made to the county. Originally, we took it off our sublease payable. That changed the amount. It would have to change the amortization schedule, and that would have benefited solid waste some, but it wasn't. It was a mistake we were trying to correct from 2007. We rethought that, and we're now calling that an asset on the solid waste books. I think it's iBank deposit. So everybody from now on will know that that $198,000 has been paid to the county, and it's an asset on our books, and in the end, we won't have to pay it again.
Okay.
And it did also increase the sublease payable by the same amount.
Yeah,
Again, for the balance book, it went under
We
asset.
had reduced it, and we put it back to the complete, it'll agree with the amortization schedule now.
Right.
So the numbers are aligned.
So the
yes.
sublease payable has gone up by that same amount.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that information is included in your agenda under items 2.3.
Okay, Commissioners, any response to Mr. Taylor's Treasurer Report, Controller Report?
Just to verify that we're not going to do this annually. This is a one-time payment, basically, effectively being the last month of the transfer station loan. Okay.
That's the last payment.
All right, good. I just wanted to hear that.
That could be done every year because the amount of that required deposit could go down. But right now, we're in agreement, we're just going to leave it on the asset. Everybody's going to know that that's an asset of ours, and we don't have to pay it at the end.
Okay, thank you.
And while Mr. Taylor is here, also I wanted to comment that I have had collected information going back to 2006 on the revenues and expenses, as well as the balance sheet. In fact, I just received from the county auditor's office some new information, and I've been compiling each of the years onto a sheet that would outline not only the amount of tonnage that came in, but then it splits out the income and the expenses, and then what the bottom line is. So the net revenue and net loss, just to see from year to year where it's at and what it's shaping up to be. So I put together some preliminary numbers, and I know Mr. Taylor has kind of verifying those, so hopefully we'll have those together so we have an idea of how it's gone in the past, and then maybe have an idea of how we can project that into the future. So again, hopefully we'll have that to everybody so we can get an idea of what our bottom line looks like.
That, in a management point of view, that's something we need to do. We've got several things we're working on. We're trying to get an accrual system going, catch up from things in the past, but that's a big picture thing that we need to look at. And I didn't get enough chance to look at it. We talked about it a little bit.
Right.
And we were up in, was it 2012, and we thought maybe that was because of the tsunami, and we didn't have quite as much profit in 2013. And I think Mary's concern is that if it goes on like that, we could be in trouble again. But I haven't had a chance to really look into it, so.
Okay, Mr. Taylor, we'll hang loose right there because we do have 3.3 claims approved by treasurer and director. Ted, I'll refer to you on the claims, and Richie, if you have any input on this, I appreciate that you'll deliver it now.
It's important to recognize that 3 of those claims were already on the agenda, and that's for fish drilling, the R3 Consulting Group, and Robert Black attorney fees. Those have all been pulled off, but I'd be happy to answer questions about any of the others. The largest of those expenses is a payment to EBA Engineering for some of the additional engineering work they've been doing associated with the water release estimates and the non-water release corrective action estimates.
Okay, Commissioners, any questions for Director or Treasurer on 3.3? Monthly cash, 3.4 monthly cash, and charge reports for January. Ted, anything on that? No report? Okay. And 3.5, earned revenue comparisons between fiscal year 12-13 and 13-14.
Bottom line is franchise fees are just a little bit shy of our projections currently for this fiscal year, and revenue from the transfer station is up slightly. But on the whole, our revenue projections are all pretty much online.
Okay, thank you, Richie. Thank you, Ted. We'll move on. Landfill closure. So let's go receive and file groundwater well installation records and lithologic data, Crescent City Landfill.
This
Crescent City.
detailed geologic report is the report that we received from Bush Geotechnical, and that we paid the $3,600 for, but it's a pretty comprehensive report, and chances are we'll be discussing this again next month. And Commissioners, any comments on 3.5 earned revenue comparisons between 12-13, 12 and 12-13, 13-14? Seeing none. I'll allow for public comment on the Director and Treasurer's report at this time. Anyone who wishes to address items on the Director and Treasurer's report can please approach the dais and deliver them now. Seeing none, we'll move on. Actually, I meant to do that before, excuse me. So we'll move on to 4.2. Discussion, possible action regarding revised draft Pledge of Revenue Agreement establishing financial assurance for post-closure maintenance and potential corrective action relating to the Crescent City landfill. Ted? Staff recommendation is that the board direct staff to present the attached draft Pledge of Revenue Agreement separately to the Crescent City Council and Del Norte County Board of Supervisors for review and approval. After a single final version has been adopted by both member agencies, staff will present this Pledge of Revenue Agreement and an associated resolution for adoption to the Authority Board. Essentially what this does is it addresses the financial liabilities of the Crescent City landfill by saying whatever financial liabilities, and we provide estimates of what those numbers might be, if they should arise, our source of revenue to pay for those liabilities is from the Del Norte County Transfer Station. And so it does pledge revenues should they be needed from that source, and all parties agree that that's how those obligations would be met. This is a requirement of the state of California. Were we to be, say, were the Crescent City landfill to be owned by a private company, they would likely have to set aside a bond or some cash to prove that they were good on addressing these liabilities. But because we are a public agency, and the presumption is that we won't be going away, that we can pledge the revenues from facilities that are under our control.
Commissioners, what would be the possible action on this, Ted? What are you looking at? Discussion and possible action regarding revised draft?
It's in the staff recommendation. As I went over, it would be to that the board direct staff to present the attached draft Pledge of Revenue Agreement separately to the Crescent City Council and the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors for review and approval. And then I will return.
Do I have a motion on the floor to do so?
I'll make a motion to do so.
Okay, and a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Okay. Did we lose a commissioner?
I did have a question on here. Is it for discussion?
Absolutely, we're at that discussion stage.
And Ted, I know I had gone over the previous draft of this, and we had talked about the sunsetting on this. And I know I saw it here before, but now I don't see it in there anymore.
It says at the end, this pledge of revenue will remain effective until revised and replaced.
So it has to be actively taken out? Is that how it's worded?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. Essentially, Cal Recycle, the state integrated waste management board, replaced by it's now called the California Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery. That state agency requires that this be in place. And so there can't be a circumstance in which it can sunset and then we don't have one. That's, for them, is absolutely unacceptable.
Oh, I thought we had language in there that, you know, when it's deemed complete, that it,
This pledge of revenue requirement, I don't know that it ever sunsets. I can look into that again, but there is the 30-year there is a
language,
30-year post-closure maintenance period. So the landfill was finally closed in 2006. There is no question that this pledge of revenue would have to go through 2036 without question. Beyond that point, there might be some possibility that it might not be required, but I'm not entirely clear on that. But this is a requirement of the Cal Recycle, and this is what
it would
they're telling us to
seem
do.
as, you know, that time goes on and, you know, the chance of having to put out money for issue that came up there would decrease as things gas off. It's less and less, and it would get to a point where, you know, they don't need to have a pledge of revenue and then it would automatically. So it just seems as if there would be a sunset in there. I mean, I would only get into a lease if there were.
I totally acknowledge what you're saying. We are revisiting the pledge of revenue that was in place previously, and I'd have to look back at the date, but I think it was like 2008. But essentially, when we update these cost estimates for post-closure maintenance liability and the water release
Right.
and the non-water release
Yeah.
corrective action,
Right.
every time we update those cost estimates,
Gotta
we
redo
would have
this.
to update the pledge of revenue.
Right.
So even before we would reach the 2036 date, I am very confident we will have to revisit this pledge of revenue and establish it once again. So while I very much hear what you're saying about wanting to have a sunset clause, this will not sunset before 2036, and we will be revising it before that time. So that's the
Okay,
current
I'll open up
status.
to public comment at this time. Anybody in the audience who wishes to address this action item, please come up to the dais. Seeing none.
Mr. Gill?
Okay, yes.
I still have.
Oh, I'm sorry,
That's
Commissioner
okay.
Hawley.
This pledge of revenue is, I understand that we're pledging the revenue that comes through the Joint Powers Agreement, the Solid Waste Management Authority. But it's being approved by the county supervisors and the city of Crescent City. Why is that? Is there any thought that at some point the general funds of either of those organizations could be impacted by the closure? In other words, don't we as the commissioners of the Solid Waste Management Authority have the ability to sign this without it going to the city and the county?
The previous discussions about the authority adopting any ordinance was that any ordinance adopted by this agency needs to be separately approved by the Crescent City Council and the Delmar County Board of Supervisors. And so I was treating this in exactly the same way.
As an ordinance.
Similarly, because it is fiscally binding, then that seems to be something that the city and the county should each specifically sign off on.
Fiscally binding on the authority.
Which we,
Right.
Please.
I'd like to make a comment. If you read paragraphs 11 and 12, this agreement actually does itself bind the city and the county separately in the event of a withdrawal or a dissolution of the Solid Waste Management Authority. That is what was contained in the last agreement. So in order to bind the city and the county, you need more than this board. it will have to go to the city council
That
and the board of
explains it then.
supervisors to sign on to that.
So that may be an interesting discussion when you get to those organizations.
Chairman Goodman?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
So, so Martha, as I understand it, as a city councilman, if I vote no and the council votes no on this pledge of revenue, it'll still go through and we're still liable for it, whether we vote no or not.
I don't know that it would go through. I don't know that Cal Recycle would find that acceptable.
What would happen if we vote no? What are they going to do to us?
There are daily fines for being out of compliance, I think ranging from $500 to $10,000.
Okay, and that's set by state law right now.
Yes,
So
it
if we
is.
had, so if the legislature changed that law, we could do that. I just, I agree with Member Wilson here that I keep hoping that this landfill is going to be over. It goes on year after year after year, and I'm not very happy about that. Doesn't seem like there's an end, and we have to pledge revenue in the city, and we have things that we want to do with the rest of our community. And it just bothers me. So I agree with you, Mr.
Well,
Hawley.
you
It'll
know-
probably be very interesting during our meeting. to
Commissioner
discuss this.
Ania, the alternative, so we're clear on this, is the authority, as owner of the landfill, is obliged to meet the financial assurance requirements associated with the closed landfill.
Right.
So it's a question, as your narrative points out, Ted, satisfying these requirements of the pledge of revenue from the Delaware County Transfer Station appears to be the lowest cost option to meet these requirements. And by that, I mean the alternative would be, what, fines? Is that what you're saying?
We don't have a choice, I understand.
Yes, we try not to get into a situation where we position ourselves where we're prone to fines. So
I guess
we're,
it just- yeah. I
Let the
agree.
record show that Commissioner Sullivan, welcome. Okay.
Yeah, I apologize. The bylaws have us at 3:30 on Wednesdays.
You know, I was tempted to say something when you delivered your comments this morning, and I chose not to, and I'm really regretting that now. I had said it in my comments that we had a meeting today, and then, of course, I just assumed everybody
So
knows.
did we change the bylaws?
Tomorrow's a holiday, so that was the issue. So anyway, you're here, and that's good news. All right, so we're on item number 4.2, discussion and action regarding revised draft pledge of revenue, establishing financial assurance for post-closure maintenance, and potential corrective action relating to the Crescent City landfill. We have a motion by Commissioner Wilson and a second by Commissioner Commissioner Hawley to move forward on that pledge. And
Can I?
and Commissioner Wilson, please, go ahead.
I would just, again, would like to, I don't know how you do that, change my motion, but if this were my business and I were pledging revenue, I wouldn't get into an open-ended agreement like this. I would have some way out. And what I would have in there would be a sentence that, I know it says until revised or replaced, but it would be, until at such time that it's deemed closed or there is no, liability is less than, I don't know, $50,000, then this is no longer in place. I would have something that I wouldn't pledge my revenue unless I had a way to get completion, So that's what I'm saying.
And I think the state law addresses some of those issues. It has the requirements for when a pledge of revenue is required. And it's only, it's somewhat stated in here as to how much the pledge of revenue is to be. But I think it's the Public Resources Code sets forth when a pledge of revenue is required. There are also other types of security that you can use other than a pledge of revenue, but they would probably be, you have to have a lot of cash on hand. You could do a cash reserve set aside, you could do a letter of credit, you could do, there's some other options in the Public Resources Code other than a pledge of revenue, but I think for the small agency like this, the pledge of revenue is the cheapest way to go.
I'm fine with the pledge of revenue. I just want to have an out. I want to have a way, a sentence that's added into here that states.
Well, actually, the whole reason the JPA exists is to protect the city and county in terms of, so the pledge of revenue is the minimum that the authority needs to do to stay in place. So without the pledge of revenue, there's no reason for the JPA.
I'm fine with the pledge of revenue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the pledge of revenue. I just wanted to have a sentence added in there that sunsets this. It states that, you know, it upon completion.
Could we add, perhaps to 14, this pledge revenue will remain effective until revised and replaced or is no longer required under law or regulation? Would that be acceptable?
Do I have a consensus from the
Yes.
board to add that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Excuse me. Okay, so I think we're ready for a vote, Karen?
No,
Yeah, I'm writing it down now. So under item 14, under the pledge of revenue, the item 14 currently reads, this pledge of revenue will remain effective until revised and replaced. That would now read, this pledge of revenue will remain effective until revised and replaced, comma, or is no longer required by law or regulation, by California law or regulation.
Commissioner Wilson, will you amend your first to reflect accordingly?
yes, I will.
And Commissioner Hawley, will you amend your second to reflect accordingly?
So amended?
Okay. All right, any other comments from the commissioners on this? Okay, Karen, I think we're ready for a vote.
Okay. Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes?
Commissioner Ania?
Yes.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
Did I forget Commissioner, excuse me, Chairman Gitlin?
That would be yes. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to Collections Franchise 5.1, acknowledge and 2014 letter to Recology del Norte regarding setting up direct deposit procedures to receive funds for disposal charges and franchise fees. Ted?
This is a very simple item. It's mostly to let the board know that we've been meeting with the county auditor's office as well as the county treasurer to try to set up direct deposits for receipts from Recology del Norte. We receive both the franchise fees and the disposal fees, and so that cash flow is very important to this agency. And both the county auditor and county treasurer have been very helpful in trying to set this up. But there is the possibility that as we set this up, we may be slightly late in receiving those payments for February and March. But I think in all likelihood, there will be very minimal delays, and we're probably very close to being set up as we speak. But it's just acknowledging, it may take a little while to work out the bugs. If they're a little late, we're not going to hold them to the letter of the contract as we try to set this up.
Commissioners?
Sounds
Comments?
like a good idea.
That's fine.
Okay, all right, we'll move forward on that. No action taken. Transfer station, discussion possible action regarding receipt of oil-based paints, stains, and architectural coatings daily at the Del Norte County Transfer Station under a partnership between Hambro, WSG, and Paint Care as authorized by Transfer Station Operations Change Order Number 17. Ted?
Yeah, I'd just really like to express my gratitude both to Paint Care and to Hambro for working this program through. The authority did adopt Change Order 17 that essentially opened the door to have this happen. And of course, the authority has been very much a part of the California Product Stewardship Council, which is an advocacy organization that has promoted the incorporation of a product stewardship program for paint since its inception, because this is a very significant cost to local governments. Previous to this program, the only time we could take enamel-based paints or stains or lacquers or varnishes was during our annual household hazardous waste collection event in September, generally from 9 to 2 on a single day. Now we will be taking those materials every single day the transfer station is open. So it's a huge leap in the amount of convenience for these products that most people have in their sheds every single day, and sometimes they're very eager to try to get rid of. It's also an issue for folks who are either doing remodeling or real estate or businesses or landlords that are sometimes turning over properties, and they have a paint shed that has a lot of materials that they need to move, and they can't necessarily wait until September. And so like I said, I'm just delighted to be able to offer this program as one more of our daily free services to the community. Though it's important to realize that this program is paid for every time somebody buys a new can of paint. When you're buying a new can of paint, you will be paying 75 cents a gallon or $1.60 for one of those 5-gallon buckets, but those revenues then are administered by Paint Care to make this program work.
So it's not free. Someone pays for it.
You pay up front, though, and part of the reason why that's a good model for how to structure these things is the more hazardous a material is, the more everybody should care about making sure those materials get to the right place. And so we want to make sure that hazardous materials we can make it as easy as possible for our customers, and this is one more example of those programs.
What is your action here, Ted?
I'm
looking at
hoping
your notes.
for applause.
Yeah. And, you've got that. I don't see that you need anything more than a consensus. Well, job well done, and we appreciate that. So we'll move forward. And
A big thank you to Hambro.
Thank you, Hap.
Okay, great.
I'm just pleased that I won't have a super fun site in my garage.
All right, any comments from the public on this generous free program? It's being forwarded by our authority now. Okay, then we'll move on. Let's go to General Solid Waste Management. We've pulled 7.1 for discussion at this time, pending the sheriff's report. 7.2, discussion possible action regarding the application of Cal Recycle to the City-County Annual Payment and Reporting System, CalPARS, to support and promote recycling programs, including beverage containers in Delaware County. Ted?
Yeah. So with thanks to Commissioner Wilson for forwarding a recent press release that the governor is looking in his new budget to essentially nix this program. But this is a regular part of the outreach budget that we have to promote recycling in the community. And it's a block grant program. $10,000 goes to each city, $10,000 to each county and $5,000 to each city. And so as administrator of recycling programs here, it's $15,000 for the Solid Waste Authority. And generally, like I said, this goes to our outreach budget and our promotion of recycling. So in the coming year, we'll submit an application for public education and outreach that includes beverage container recycling, support of our curbside recycling program and neighborhood drop-off recycling programs, and public education to promote beverage recycling and litter prevention and cleanup where the materials collected, including beverage containers, that will be recycled. So essentially, the action we're looking for is direction to the staff to prepare and submit an application for the CAPRS program.
Commissioners, do I have that recommendation in the form of a motion? 7.2.
And I'm sorry,
I'll make a motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'd be glad to second that.
Okay, second it. And let's have for discussion. Any commissioners wish to weigh in on this? It's a good idea.
One more piece I would like to suggest as possibly a follow-on is that because the governor has proposed to nix this program and because it's very important not only to our program but to rural communities throughout the state, I would also look for possible support from the board that we contribute to advocacy to preserve this program, either through the Californians Against Waste or the California Resource Recovery Association or the Environmental Services JPA or the groups that we belong to that might be advocating on this. Just, it's a way that we could get approval to chime in and say, yes, keep this program, please.
All right, any commissioners, we have a motion and we have a second. Karen, would you let's hear that again, the motion, how it's phrased. So, and I'll ask for public input on this. Anyone from the audience wish to have a comment? Okay, Karen, can you read that back?
The motion was to direct staff to prepare and submit an application for funding for the program, the Cal Recycle program.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Let's call the vote.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Ania?
Yes.
And Chairman Gitlin?
Yes. Yes. Yes, sorry. Okay, 7.2.
Question on the advocacy issue. So is there consensus direction or would you like to discuss that? Or?
Well, if I may, maybe a letter to our assemblyman and our state senator instead of having to do all the advocacy groups. Go straight to the people that are going to make that judgment.
Okay.
So
They
that
should-
would
they
be
should-
to
Chesbro and Senator
Chesbro and
Nielsen.
Nielsen.
They're the ones that have to approve the governor's budget, and they'd be the perfect people to say, we want to keep our programs.
Okay, do I have a consensus on this?
Yep.
Okay, good. Then we'll move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did want to, the information for the, again, the governor has proposed eliminating $100 million in recycling programs, in that the state expenditures have exceeded revenues, and so over a 3-year phase out, that their plan is to start eliminating, cutting these programs for reimbursement. And one of these programs was this one that was in our package today, but there are others that might affect us as well.
Okay, I think we've moved on that subject. Let's move on to 7.3, discussion, possible action regarding possible development of code of ethics and conduct for the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority. Ted?
This was based on a suggestion from Commissioner Hawley that I apparently misunderstood. But essentially, he was asking me to look at the city's code of ethics policies with respects to iPads. I did not realize there was a separate policy for that, but I did get a copy of the city's code of ethics policy, and I looked up the Solid Waste Authority's code of ethics policy and our history on that, and discovered that under Resolution 2010-01, essentially, we do have an ethics policy in place, and that all commissioners are expected to read and sign this code of ethics policy under that resolution. And so staff recommendation is that the board direct each commissioner to read and sign the authority code of ethics and conduct and provide a copy of that signed document for the authority's files. And that the board directs staff to take steps necessary to obtain and appropriately file signed copies of the Code of Ethics and Conduct Policy for the authority treasurer controller and all appointed members of the Del Norte Solid Waste Task Force. So that would be in compliance with our current rules. But that's a somewhat separate discussion of, do you want to change any of those rules? Do you want to amend any of them? But under our current policies, which seem to be very close to what the ethics policies of the city are, then the action would be to direct everybody to have it signed and direct staff to make sure that all the members of the task force and appointees of this body also sign.
Commissioners, do I have a motion to sign, and apparently it's Resolution 2010-01? Is that?
No, that's already been adopted, this 2010-01, but that's the document that essentially
All
says
right.
this is part
You're
of our...
going to have a document prepared for us?
There is
reflecting-
one already,
It's in
and
here.
it will be handed to you to sign.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve that?
I'll make a motion to approve. Can we sign this one right here?
Yes, you
Yeah,
can.
may as well.
That would be fine.
Do I have a second?
So wait, we're making a motion to do something we already have in our rules?
Well, have all of the commissioners signed
Just
this?
give direction to the commissioners to sign their individual ones and hand it in. I don't know if we need a motion, do we?
I'm not sure you do need a motion, Commissioner
Okay.
I
Sullivan.
have a question I'd like to ask. This is this is a signature. City council, the state law says that every 2 years, we have to take ethics training.
Yes,
And
and
we
that-
give that to our boards and commissions. Isn't that supposed to be here too?
That's in addition to.
So we are going to do that?
Yes, and
So
in
that-
fact, and thank you for reminding me of that, and I do have signed copies of that for all but one of our commissioners, so you might want to look into whether or not yours is current. And general,
Well,
you all.
We last passed,
So I'm hearing clearly we don't need a motion to do this.
I don't think
It's
you
a
do.
consensus that everybody here, do we all wish to sign this? And I have no problem signing the Code of Ethics.
well, I don't need to sign it because we have it with the city every 2 years and mine's current. And that law passed several years ago and I'm surprised that solid waste didn't have that on the books.
What we do, like I said, this is in addition.
Except for the public one, public member, which we've had for the last 13 years.
Well, I think the reason for having this, though, is that it's a separate entity and just having something on the books. I don't think at the county, though, we're required to do the ethics course, but there's nothing to sign necessarily. We're just required to do it.
And
Yeah,
pass
there's a
it.
sign-in sheet when you take the course, and you have to sign the sheet at the
Yeah.
time that you take it.
Well,
So it's on record, it's on your file, but I don't mind signing it, just that I'm current in it. I think all of us are except for me.
I don't have a problem signing something that is part of our expected behavior anyway. And I do, again, the county has a course, an online course that you have to take and pass. And by taking the class, I should say, online, I guess it's implied that you are signing it, but I have no problem going forward, and I guess we have consensus on this then?
Yep.
Okay, so all commissioners agree to sign this and give this back to you, Ted.
And Mr. Gitlin?
Sure.
If, as Ted alluded to, my suggestion was that we look at a technology agreement for all us to sign if we were being provided with iPads. So if or when we provide a member with an iPad, we can look at that policy maybe and put that in place.
I don't need an iPad.
I know.
Yeah, I'm fine
why-
without it.
That's why I'm reneging.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, do we have consensus? Let's move on to 7.4, discussion, possible action regarding the formation, responsibilities, and history of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority with respect to ordinances addressing blight and illegal dumping. So, Ted?
Okay. So this is the fifth in a series of 6 historical background pieces for the authority's entertainment about how we got here and what is the purpose of this agency. So the fifth of the purposes of this agency, as described in the Joint Powers Agreement, is ordinances addressing blight and illegal dumping. So under our current ordinance, 2008-01, the legislative findings included that the board is founded to determine that the storage, accumulation, collection, processing, recovery, and/or disposal of discards is a matter of great public concern, and that improper control of such matters may create a public nuisance, air pollution, fire hazard, rat and insect infestation, and other problems affecting the public health, safety, and welfare. And that the board has found and determined that the activities and businesses of collecting and subsequently transporting, transferring, processing, recycling, and/or disposing of residential and commercial discards generated within Del Norte affect the health, safety, public welfare, and quality of life of the local residents and visitors. So the purpose of these ordinances is to firmly establish the responsibilities for each person, property owner, business, producer, or government agency regarding discard management in Del Norte County and identifying acceptable management methods that do not damage the habitat, property, and aesthetic values of Del Norte County, but protect and preserve Del Norte County lands, waterways, and coast. So our current ordinances really try to establish that each responsible party has an affirmative responsibility to assure that their discards generated on properties they own are handled, stored, and disposed of in legal manners, and they shall provide for the collection of those discards from their premises on which they're generated either through a collector or by direct self-haul to appropriate recycling facility or disposal site. So that was the big change when these ordinances were adopted. It essentially took a situation where we could have people who are renting and neither the landlord nor the renter would take responsibility for materials, because the landlord would say it was the renter's responsibility and the renter would say I ran out of money, etc., whatever the excuse was. But prior to the adoption of these ordinances, we would regularly get calls from landlords or real estate agents that would be concerned because when they would have a renter leave, oftentimes they would leave behind a pile of debris that really needed attention and management, and they would say, well, can you cut me a break? And the conversation usually went, well, did you collect rent? Because if you collected rent, then you have some responsibility for making sure that the materials were properly disposed. As we were engaging on this issue, the code enforcement officer, Dave Mason, essentially suggested that what we approach this as is a administrative citation approach rather than a legal approach. if a jurisdiction just relies on California state law, essentially you have to have an eyewitness or a photograph of someone illegally dumping in order to prosecute them. Whereas under an administrative citation process, if you find a piece of evidence that a waste is associated with a specific property, you can take that as adequate evidence that that material was not delivered to the right place and that the responsible party did not comply with their responsibility. Part of the context of this was also that there were people who were discussing mandatory collection, meaning that everybody who had a residence or a business would have to sign up for garbage service. That was viewed by many as not entirely favorable to those people who were self-haulers, and many of our customers are active and enthusiastic self-haulers. So what was decided as a way forward was mandatory responsibility, but non-mandatory franchise subscription. So subscription to the franchise collection services would not be mandatory. However, every responsible party, that is a property owner or land manager, shall be responsible for the satisfactory collection of all accumulated discards on the premises and to prevent them from becoming a nuisance as defined by any applicable state, county, city, or authority ordinance, code, or regulation. So the requirement was that responsible parties provide basic collection services. So the idea is that if you are a landlord, that those services are provided. You can also increase the rent to cover for those costs, but the expectation is that those services are provided as part of the rental agreement. And that's an overview of the ordinances as they currently exist. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners? Okay. Any action required on 7.4?
Nope.
Nope. All right, so we'll move on to 7.5. This is discussion and possible action regarding Authority Ordinance 2014-01, repealing ordinances 2208, 01, 02, 03, and 0901. Do we have two separate actions here, or is this all as part of one action, 7.5? So, Ted, would you explain to the audience here tonight what the title of each of these ordinances, 20801, 02, 03?
I'd be happy to.
01? Go ahead.
So, Ordinance 2008-01 is the Solid Waste and Recycling Responsibility Ordinance, and this establishes affirmative responsibilities for acceptable discard management, as I just discussed, for persons, businesses, producers, government agencies, and property owners in Del Norte County. This ordinance also addresses issues like flow control and enforcement of the collections franchise, as well as addressing issues such as lack of service, inadequate service, and theft of service. 2008-02 is a nuisance abatement ordinance, and it describes and defines nuisances, violations, and abatement procedures associated with discards, including blight associated with discards which have been inappropriately accumulated, stored, or disposed, and the city and the county retain responsibility for nuisances not associated with discards or illegal dumping. Ordinance 2008-03 is the administrative citation ordinance that establishes enforcement procedures through administrative citations, which would be in addition to possible criminal, civil, or other legal remedies. And 2009-01 is the enforcement officer ordinance that empowers the authority director to appoint an ordinance enforcement officer to enforce all authority ordinances, including those listed above. So they all work as a combination, but in terms of the actual authority policies, most of those are described in 2008-01, and the rest of them are how those are enacted.
And for the record, 7.6, which is directly connected to this, will re-implement the flow control ordinance and franchise agreements. So that, I want to make that clear now. And I see that I'm going to open this up to the public for discussion. And I see Code Officer Mason here. Would you like to address the authority on the 7.5? As a matter of fact, I think we'll include 7.6 as part of this overall discussion too.
Thank you. For the record, David Mason, Code Enforcement Officer of Del Norte County. City and county staff met and discussed at length these issues. Heidi Kunstler, Interim Director, and Gene Palazzo, the City Manager, prepared a letter. You should have that in your packet. I think I can cut to the chase here. at the end of that letter, the last paragraph, because you're having an independent contractor look at the functioning of the authority and the goal and objectives of the authority, or even the existence of the authority for that matter, are essentially in flux at this point. That's why staff felt this repealing and reinstating was a little premature. We felt that it would be better serve the public to have clear goals and objectives established. So these are the goals, these are the objectives, and then have staff review how to meet those goals and objectives, rather than just throw the baby out with the bathwater and start from scratch and have that period of time when it's whose responsibility is it and how does it get handled. And just on another note, on the flow control ordinance, I note that there's no punishment listed for a violation of the flow control. So I'm assuming, not being legal counsel, I'll defer to your attorney, that the only enforcement would be injunctive relief if somebody was to set themselves up as a trash collector.
Right, for large cases, if somebody tried to start their own business, you'd probably go with injunctive relief after a warning. As also by default by state law, any violation of an authority ordinance is a misdemeanor. Good luck trying to get the DA to prosecute that, but...
Yeah. And of course, I would not be able to do anything with it because you're looking at deleting 2009-01, which authorizes me to enforce the authority's ordinances. So if you delete that one, then I have absolutely nothing to do with anything the authority does, because you've removed the authority to do that. I'm a public officer, not a peace officer. Peace officer, by definition, can enforce any law in the state. Public officer can only enforce those laws they're specifically authorized to enforce. So there's that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, we'll open it up to the board now. Commissioner
So
Neal.
if you had no laws to enforce with the solid waste authority, would you go back to becoming the county code enforcement with the county regulations and rules?
Well, yeah, that would be pretty much the end result. Is there wouldn't be, I wouldn't have anything to do with it.
The county doesn't have policies on these other things?
Oh, no, the county does have ordinances, and we don't have a responsibility ordinance. There's that falls back on our environmental health to determine what's adequate or not adequate under the state health and safety code.
Okay,
That's just how that works out.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I got a question. Thanks for coming. I did get Heidi sent me the email yesterday afternoon, and I'm glad one of you is here to explain, but I'm not sure, we've asked you guys for a couple years now to get together with the city to have a discussion about what parts of the ordinance should be, so we don't have a duplicative setup on the ordinances, that the county can adopt one and the city can adopt one that are the same. R3 is not looking at the ordinances. It's not in their proposal of work. So that's the part, unless the only argument I could find on here, and the reason that there's a delay on this and the responses you guys want to hold off, is that the thought that maybe the JPA wouldn't be in existence after this gets done. That would be the only reason. But in the meantime, I would anticipate, especially after 2 years, that you guys would come forward with some recommendations about ordinances the county can adopt as well as the city that wouldn't need the solid waste ordinances to go into effect. And I'm kind of surprised you guys don't have that yet. That's been kind of disappointing.
Well, I'll go back to what the general consensus was at the meeting, is that staff isn't in charge of the goals and objectives of the authority. That the authority needs to be clear about what the goals and objectives are so that staff can prepare a plan to meet those goals and objectives.
Except in the existing
the dog
ordinances,
doesn't
there's
wag the tail.
No, I understand that, but there's
The dog
certain
wags the
tools.
tail doesn't wag the dog.
But there's certain tools in the existing ordinance of solid waste that you need, obviously, and that's what we're asking. We're asking,
Right.
what are the pieces of the ordinance that the county could use? We're not asking you to set policy. We're asking you to go through the existing ordinance in solid waste and saying, what is something at the county we need to adopt as well as the city? That's the point, and that's what we've been asking for 2 years now. And that's the part I'm disappointed in, is I'm not asking you to set policy for the authority or for the county or city. I'm asking you to look through the ordinances in conjunction with the city and say, these pieces we absolutely have to have. These are necessary for me to do my job. I'm not asking you to set policy. That's the part where I think the response is completely inadequate from what the expectation, especially over a 2-year time frame. I mean, we need to know from you what tools you need to do your job. Because you obviously, you've got an oath and everything, and you do a great job at your job. The presentation was excellent this morning. But I don't find it adequate to say we want to wait and see, because it's been 2 years.
And if I can follow up on that, Dave, and again, we have levels of governance that are operating that are not really in practice. They're not in operation. And just the ordinance having to do with administrative citation, I see almost no activity in the last 5 years, I think 25 or 30 times, where you've actually pulled out a pad and written someone up. So I'm wondering if you can do that job and give you the tools you need to do as a code enforcement officer rather than as an officer for the Del Norte Solid Waste Authority. And this is what we have is what we call duplication. I think everybody here on this board wants to give the city and the county all the tools it needs without having a third appendage in there, meaning the Solid Waste Authority. So no one wants to see your job not be done professionally and in an excellent manner. I think it's where it comes from. Do we need a third level of bureaucracy to administer this? And so I think this is an overdue conversation. We've had this discussion for, as Commissioner Sullivan mentioned, for at least a couple of years, and no one seems to act on it. But I'm going to defer to other commissioners for input and questions to Mr. Mason. Mary, do you have questions for Dave or Commissioner Hawley?
I just have a couple of comments, and this is going to come out sooner or later, so it might as well be sooner. As I look at the 2008-01 ordinance, which I think is the driving force in all the other ordinances, throughout this, I believe are paragraphs that are not present in the city ordinances or the county ordinances. I mean, I don't think you have ordinances regarding collection and transportation of goods, or I mean, I could go through this and go the collection services, how you enforce that, prohibiting processing or disposal methods, some identification that of responsible parties and landlords' responsibilities relative to tenants. None of that exists, I don't think, in either organization. No. So without this, I don't know how you would pursue those issues unless these were in your bank of ordinances or unless the city's was in theirs. I'm just disappointed. There's a lot of information here, and we're talking about sweeping all the ordinances off, service requirements for rental properties. These are all issues that in 2008 and 2009, there were community meetings, and there was extensive discussions, and these were a good idea back then. Yep. And I don't know what's happened between 2008 and 2014 to make them no longer a good idea. So I don't know if you can give me some sense of that.
I wish I could.
Okay.
I really do. I don't understand it myself, to be honest with you. Yeah,
okay. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Keep in mind, I'm not a department head, and I don't set policy, and I don't really get to make too many decisions. I just do as I'm directed. And there's been a change in leadership in CDD a couple times. I now have an interim director, and she's doing her best to get things up to speed and whatnot, and make up for things that have happened in the past. I know that I can't speak for city staff, but I know they've expressed some frustration with who do they work for and who's directing them, and where does the direction come from and whatnot. So I think really if you want city and county staff to prepare something, that direction has to come from the city council and from the board of supervisors to the appropriate department head to direct staff to do that. Okay. I think that's really where the problem lies.
Let me ask it this way. Is there a conflict with having these on the books in your
I don't see
activities?
There's a conflict where if you don't want it enforced, it doesn't have to be enforced. I don't see an urgency to just take it off the books.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wilson, did you have some questions for Mr. Mason?
Excuse me, no, not particularly to Mr. Mason, but I did have a little bit of history that I wanted to go over just generally.
General comments. Okay, so thank you, Dave. I appreciate your comments. They're very and treated with a great deal of value, and we're listening to you. So at this point, I'd like to open up to the public. If anyone from the public has not spoken on this issue and wishes to address, they may do so. Okay, Mr. Lonsdale, you can come up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Bill Lonsdale again. I'm here to speak in favor of the staff recommendation that either alternative 2 or 3 be adopted by your board. It's painful to watch Mr. Mason go through what he went through this morning and also this afternoon. Basically, if the staff report is accurate, Mr. Mason is telling you these ordinances are the only tools that I have right now, pending satisfaction of Commissioner Sullivan's request that detailed description of necessary tools be made. And what I've heard from Mr. Mason and also from your comments on the board today is that it looks like alternative 2 is the thing that will please everybody. More guidance to the task force, more scrubbing of the existing ordinances, but don't throw them away until you've fixed what needs to be fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lonsdale. Okay.
Andy Larson with the county. It was my understanding when we went through this 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, that the 10-member board made policy that the 5-member board previous who made the ordinances would no longer make, this board will no longer make ordinances that are not specifically passed by your representatives. And one of the issues is it was building a bureaucracy on the way it was put together. It could be simplified, handled better if the city and the county made their ordinances to match a lot of what was in it. There was some redundancy in these ordinances, and the 10-member board, it's my understanding, put them on hold. Didn't rescind them, but put them on hold, these 3 ordinances.
No, from what I understand is that the ordinances were in place, but any future ordinances had to be ratified by the city, full county to go into effect. So this board doesn't have the ability to pass any future laws going forward without the city and county approval, which makes sense because the city and county representatives are elected to that body, and and we have 1 member at large is elected to that. So
I do believe you're correct in that. Actually, I have a letter here from Kevin Hendricks, and I'll just quote it exactly. And this was, he said, due to the controversy over the adoption of these ordinances and the potential to amend or repeal all or part of the authority ordinances, staff has been hesitant to fully enforce all provisions in these ordinances. So again, at the meeting, when the full board was here, that it was discussed, again, because of public, outcry that they really weren't being enforced across the board and they weren't fully implemented.
And the city and the county were asked a couple of years ago to go back, put their ideas where it was good, get them to match to where you're not making it redundant and you're not building another bureaucracy that you don't need. And the only thing that makes any sense is to go back, repeal them, take the good parts out, the city and county get together and make sure that everybody's covered and the state laws are being represented, county laws are being represented, and the city laws are being represented. But a lot of what was inclusive in these original ordinances wasn't good.
Thank you, Andy. I'll open up to any other additional public comments, and then we'll bring it back to the board.
Wesley Nunn, I think the frustration lies in that your power is limited to repealing. You don't have the power without the Board of 10 to pass anything. No, we all know that. And with that limit of power, the only way to force the power of 10 or the Board of 10 to convene and look at this is to repeal these ordinances. If these are repealed tonight, then I hope that immediately would be agendized a Board of 10 to listen to Dave Mason, hear everything he needs for his tools, and to immediately, or as soon as possible, have that Board of 10 look at adopting what needs to be adopted.
Thank you, Wes. Elizabeth Henry, I previously had indicated you'd already spoken on this issue, but apparently there's some issues here that you may wish to readdress, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to come up to the dais and re-explain, have your point of view for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Elizabeth Henry, county resident. I really want to affirm what Dave Mason said, and I think that's partly the heart of this, that there are things that he presently cannot do, that he can do because of the authority ordinances. And if you remove those, there's not going to be anything there. There's also this potential for county and city, well, I'm not sure about the city actually, but the county to get reimbursement from the authority for work that Dave does. And I'm sure that in the eyes of the county, that might be a benefit. And I understand there may be necessity to do an MOU with the city with similar goals. But again, it doesn't make sense to get rid of these ordinances because they were done with public input. They had a goal. There was a problem at the time. They addressed that. It seems that things are going well. I don't see the reason for repealing. If every law was repealed because there's some redundancy or confusion, we wouldn't have anything. I mean, that's not a reason to repeal these ordinances. So the other thing is, I think that there should be something, the task force should be bringing something in place. I see no suggestions except repeal. So anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Henry. Any other public comments? And we'll move it right along. Is there anyone other than Victoria Dickey, anyone else beside that? So we'll wrap this up. Come on, Vicki. And I just want to make one comment, Ms. Henry. You obviously have not heard of the Affordable Health Care Act and how they pull things out and put things back in. So anyway, just having said that, go ahead.
The ordinance 2008-01 is a 25-page ordinance. Of that, apparently, that plus the others probably come out to close to 40 pages. Of that, we may need a page or two. For a couple of years, Dave Mason has been on the Solid Waste Task Force along with everyone else. Request was made time and time again to have the city and the county get together, make the appropriate suggestions. None came forward. This is a way to require that they come forward if it's important. Up until 2008, we relied on the state law, the county, and the city. In 2008, the ordinance here, the solid waste ordinance, came into effect and has not been really used according to the letter that Ms. Wilson read. I know that I was told that, we won't enforce the provisions against the landlords if they have an agreement with their tenant, that the tenant will get service. Well, that's selective enforcement. When you change heads, you change laws. We need something that is specific. The state law is very good. It's very succinct. I think that you get verbose, you get unequal enforcement. I happen to seriously respect Dave Mason. I've seen him do incredible things. I don't tag any of those to this ordinance, but I think that they should be repealed in their entirety. I think that at that point, you're going to have people come forward with what they need if they want to put that back to the task force. Once they give input to that group is a tiger. They go in, they go through every single word. I believe they can come up with something that the city can adopt, or the county can adopt, or both. But if the city has an ordinance, and the county has the ordinance, and the solid waste has an ordinance, if the solid waste one is so good, why didn't the city and county repeal theirs? Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. At this point, any other comments? I'm going to bring it back to the board now for additional comments. Board commissioners?
I'd kind of like to go through a little bit of history. I just found out from that previously, back when the idea was brought forward that these ordinances be established with the JPA, it was at a time when the JPA had quite a bit of money, and so the county was looking to use some of that money to help with enforcement and then to relieve some of the financial burdens on the county. Again, as I've been doing my analysis of the trends of net revenue and net loss over the years, this authority really is not in a position to take on extra expenses. And what I would say is that the history, again, when I first got into the task force, it was put on right away in front of us that we needed to have a workshop, and that the workshop was for the public members that were, again, there was controversy because of this body passing ordinances. And they had already had workshops. We had over, we had a community workshop. There were, 17 different, landlords that showed up. They were very concerned with portions of this, basically section 8.01 that makes them the responsible party. Also, if you go into if there are any violations of this, what the penalty goes on to, with the responsible party being called the landowner as opposed to the person that might do the illegal dumping. If they had a tenant on their property and the tenant went out and dumped illegally, the landowner could actually be held criminally responsible. And that was the big outcry from the workshop that we had from the landlords, them being held criminally responsible for someone else's actions. And that is in this ordinance. We had worked with this ordinance about trying to figure out how to correct that. Again, there were many issues. Basically, it's very burdensome. It lacks transparency. It's 25 pages long. It goes into, there's just been a lot of contention and public confusion regarding these ordinances due to the inconsistencies between the city and the county and the solid waste authority ordinances. And it's really not right to have inconsistent ordinances. It's not fair to the community. It's even happened that it's been, there have been 3 citations that have taken place within the city limits with these ordinances. I have...
Over what period of time, those 3 citations?
I have a total of 31 citations that were issued. This is a list, a summary of citations under the Del Norte Solid Waste Authority ordinances, and the date, this was given to me by Mr. Hendricks at the end of 2012. So again, there were, so that would be from 2008, 9, 10, 11, so 5 years, there were 31 citations that were issued. And I have asked, again, that since their adoption, that with these 31 citations, there's been one nuisance abatement ordinance, in comparison, the city and county have abated 20 public nuisance or blighted properties in the same time frame, and there were over 1,379 cases, with 590 of those cases including for illegal dumping and trash issues. So in fiscal year 2011-2012, there was approximately, even though there was $20,000 a year allocated for enforcement, only $520 went towards Mr. Mason. This year, there have not been, they have not had any money expended towards enforcement of these ordinances. An issue, again, our responsibility on this board is I have a problem with the way these ordinances have been partially, they've only been partially enforced, and some of them not enforced at all. And what would happen is that if there were a case that came up, they would call Mr. Hendricks Mr. Mason would call Mr. Hendricks and see if it would need to, at that time, if they should move forward or not. Well, that's inconsistent. If you've got a law on the books, you should be enforcing it at all the times, not, well, we better hold off this time, or no. If we have a job to be fair to everybody. And so basically, I don't think that they haven't been consistent, they haven't been fully implemented, and there are other county agencies that work with illegal dumping besides this agency here. Again, in my review of the records for the illegal dumping, where we really started to make great gains in illegal dumping was not when this ordinance went in place in 2008. It was back in 2005 when Mr. Mason came to work for the County of Del Norte. And then also the triplicate gave some great press, and so at that point in time there were just the illegal dumping was really being tackled in a great way, and only later did this ordinance come out. There are a few tools in here that Mr. Mason has used. I've gone through all of the citations that have been written, and what I did was I took I just did just a tiny little spreadsheet on which ones were actually used. And again, I just have there were in the 2008-01, there was section 4.03 to 4.06. They were cited 30 times, and section 5.01 and 5.02 was cited 6 times. That's where the landlord would be responsible, the landlord. Okay. So that's been 6 times over the course of those years that's been cited, and 30 times for the other sections. And those sections really are in regards to accumulation of waste. That's one that's an issue that Mr. Mason often uses.
So Commissioner Wilson, your position is the ordinances are being grossly underused?
They are not being used. Again, it's been 3 times in the city that someone has gotten a citation, and 23 times in the county has there been a citation. Again, and also if you take a look at the money, and it's confusing to have something on the books like this that's actually, if you're gonna have an ordinance, enforce it. Have the rules the same for everybody, not pick and choose. And what I would say again is that I feel that all of these ordinances we had tried to move forward previously, sent letters to the city council as well as the board of supervisors when I was on the task force, and then came to this board as well, asking that they would change and update their ordinances first, and then we would recommend repeal later. That never happened. And so again, with moving ahead with this fashion in repealing or revoking or rescinding, I'm not sure what the proper word is, whatever the easiest one would be, first, then they would necessarily have to take action at that point in time, and that's what we had agreed as a task force anyway, and I don't know about, I think this body as well had agreed it would be the best thing for the future. So my big question is, does this body need to be an enforcement agent? Yes or no? I mean, I'm looking at all the details. I can go into a lot of different details. I can get into the, here, the construction, the solid waste now is involved in construction and demolition, that there would have to be a, this whole section here is one section. You'd have to require anybody doing any building or any covered project that it would need to get another permit through the solid waste authority. Why do you need that? That should, if you're getting permitted through the county and they're agreeing with the materials that you're using, well, again, it's creating more bureaucracy for people that are out trying to do something. The registered self-haulers on here, again, I refer back to Kevin Hendrick's letter, December 2012. Maybe it was this other one over here. Staff report, August 2012. And basically, they are, there are currently no registered haulers. They haven't used that section of the letter. Materials management plan has not been fully implemented. He goes into some of the other agencies that are doing cleanups. He cites county road departments as doing cleanups, agricultural departments cleanups, the parks department is doing cleanups, building and maintenance department is doing cleanups. So again, there are many different agencies that are out doing cleanups, and I don't know if I'm answering some of your questions. It was a 25-page ordinance. I don't want to go into a lot of time, but I through my experience with this is that it's been a big controversy for the public to even understanding why is the authority passing ordinances. And the former chair of this, when I sat out there in the audience, the former chair of, I guess it would be the 10-member board, he had never received as many calls on anything as this. When I stepped into the solid waste, or for the task force, that was the first thing on the agenda, had to have another public meeting. Well, shoot, that was in 2011. That was almost 3 years later. It was still contention at that time. We had to have another public meeting. Again, there are issues with this ordinance as is, it making, one party criminally responsible for the actions of another is bad. Having your person in the city, you've got one person in the city that was cited by this ordinance, and they were also cited by the city ordinance. They got cited for the same issue.
Hey, Mary, can I have you wrap up your...
Okay. So basically, I hope I answered a few of your questions. I have some big issues with the ordinance. I think it's best to completely repeal all of these ordinances and to adopt the ordinances relating to 7.6 that would again put the authority in charge of flow control, and also the franchise, making sure that the franchisees
We'll talk about 7.6 shortly. Good
So,
enough.
okay,
All right,
let's
thank
start
you,
now.
Commissioner Wilson.
I got it all.
I'd like to keep the comments going, and again, Commissioner Hawley and Commissioner Sullivan, if you have additional input at this time. Go ahead.
I have some input. I've looked at this carefully as well, not nearly as carefully as you have, and actually, Mary, you brought out a lot of detail that I appreciate having, and that's what I think we've been lacking here at the dais, is the detail and the ability to discuss some of these very issues that you have brought up. You know, if we're going to discuss the responsibility of landlords and their tenants, let's bring it back here and discuss it. Let's just not sweep it away. I mean, we should be withdrawing certain ones of these ordinances, keeping the ones that work, and doing away with the rest. Instead, what we're doing is a carte blanche removal of all of the ordinances, and that seems kind of irresponsible to me. My major issue with the ordinances is it seems like most of them are related to blight. And the city and the county has both made a concerted effort to try and deal with blight issues. Ordinances like these are the only ones that keep us being proactive instead of reactive when it comes to blight. Yes, we all have ordinances that deal with blighted issues within our community, except that it's usually enforced after there's a problem. This way we're being proactive and encouraging people to recycle and to handle their garbage in a responsible way. So to me, this is one more arrow in the quiver against blight. I'm wondering too if the ordinances are required in any way, Ted, by any funding source or any state law.
That's a really good question, because part of the reason that they developed the way they did is that we were aware that the mandatory commercial recycling requirements were really just on the cusp of being passed as these ordinances were being developed. And so that's part of how we included recycling as part of the provisions under the collections franchise and addressed within this ordinance. Similarly, Commissioner Wilson mentioned the construction and demolition. That was incorporated because we knew that Cal Green would be updated. And as it turns out, although the county apparently was fairly well ahead on that one, when the city came to need to implement a Cal Green, I worked closely with them to make sure that they had the documents we had already prepared so that it would be easy for them to work on it. So part of the issue about why these ordinances developed the way they did is that all of the responsibility for solid waste and recycling was vested in this entity, in this body. And so these ordinances were developed to address the responsibilities that are taken on by this body. And also, because they tended to be, prior to these ordinances being in place, fairly low priorities for the city and the county code enforcement officers, because they have many codes that have nothing to do with solid waste or blight or recycling or illegal dumping or accumulation of discards. And they can fill their days enforcing those aspects of those ordinances. And so the only time that solid waste really becomes a priority for them is if there's a big deal. And so that's part of how those evolved. But also I really want to emphasize that part of how this has been implemented is not necessarily to look for new enforcement actions, to look for ways that we could issue citations. Our interest has always been, from the get-go, compliance. We want to make sure the materials get to the right place and that they're properly managed. And so we can oftentimes get there with merely a conversation without necessarily writing a citation. I really appreciate Dave Mason's efforts in that regard, and there certainly have been many circumstances where we've had conversations about blighted properties or issues he wanted to work on, where no citation came about, but simply by showing up and talking to the property owner, we were able to address the issue so that it wasn't a community problem.
Okay, thank you. So I'll sum up. You know, I had people approach me over this issue, and basically some were saying, you know, in the grand scheme of things, this is really small stuff because we haven't done very much. You know, it's not overly enforced. You know, don't waste your time with it. But really, to me, it's a larger issue. It's an issue of what kind of a solid waste management authority we want to be. Do we just want to be garbage collection, move them in, move them out, or do we want to take a look at the bigger picture? And I, for one, if I'm going to be on this authority, I want to look at the bigger picture. I want to be a leader in some of these activities. And these enforcements, I think, show that leadership. So summarily, I guess, when it comes to a vote, I will be voting against this matter because I just think it hasn't been vetted sufficiently. The task force, we've asked for additional information. I think, Ted, you could provide additional information in some detail in each one. And I know that you have a lot of information, Mary, but I don't have it before me, so I really couldn't consider it, you know, over time. And I just think it's a little early to have an item before this, the history of the ordinance, and then the item after this being sweeping away all the ordinances. It just flies in the face of reasoning to me. So I just don't think the timing is right, and I'm going to have a hard time convincing the city council that this is the right way to go. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Hawley. Commissioner Sullivan?
Well, there's some misinformation out there. First of all, you and I are going to disagree on this because I don't think this agency is a social change agency. I think it's been used that way in the past. It's a utility. That's what it does. It collects garbage. It is not a social change agency. That's where I have a strong disagreement with you on that. In terms of the recycling, Recology's been doing the recycling. That's what got us up to their numbers. It's not, prior to the new contract going into effect, the only recycling being done was a combination of Hambros and Recology recycling. It wasn't Solid Waste Management Authority. So that's erroneous information put out there. We weren't even close to our number at that point until they started putting their whatchamacallits, their bins out there for people to recycle in as a free service on the old contract. So I just don't buy that, and I do have a problem with solid waste having their nose in construction projects and some other things. I think this is way overkill, and the other thing is there's really not a check and balance as much, at least at the county or at the city if those ordinances are in place, and that's part of the reason we've been trying to direct. I'm going to actually put it on the board's agenda, a request to be on the board's agenda for the next board meeting is a request that Code Enforcement Officer Mason and I would hope the two city councilmen up here would do the same thing on their city councils. The two of you get together, tell us the best parts of these ordinances that you have to have, and then we can present it. And I'm not opposed to tabling it for a meeting or two to come to some kind of consensus. I have a real problem with this being a social change agent. There's not the checks and balances that you have with the County Board of Supervisors or with the City Council. Because if people aren't happy with us, they can vote us out. Solid Waste Authority isn't really, I mean, we have one member that, as a public member, we basically are going to select and has to get ratified by the city and county, but it's not the same process. I don't think there should be another entity involved in the process. I think you've got a county and you have a city. Those ordinances, with the good things in these ordinances, can be adopted by the city and county, and you get rid of these ordinances that were not put in place by an elected body. That's the most frustrating thing to deal with. People deal with laws all the time, but at least you have some recourse. With the previous authorities' ordinances, there was no recourse. There really was no check and balance with that. So that's the problem I have with that. I want to make sure the information's correct. The recycling numbers were hit up in a combination of Recology and Hambros doing their job, not by the authority board. That authority board is not what got us up to the recycling. Yeah, we do some household hazardous waste and some other cool things, but the majority of the recycling was done by those two private companies. So let's call it what it is. Let's not say the authority all of a sudden put something magically in place through their ordinances that got us to those numbers. That is not the case. That's not the facts.
With respect, Commissioner Sullivan, I really feel obliged to point out that the service standards that are in the contracts for Recology and for Hambro were developed through the task force by this board.
On the new contract.
On the new contract.
I'm talking about the old contract.
I'm just saying.
Because the recycling number got up prior to the new contract, that recycling number got up to that 50% diversion rate because of the work those two private companies did, not anything this authority board did.
Those contracts are this board's contracts, and so this board deserves some of the credit for those numbers. I'm not in any way
So when did this contract go
diminishing
into place?
Well,
What year?
we've had contracts with...
This contract, when did it go in place? What year was the year that this contract was?
Recology,
Yeah.
you mean? That started in July 2011.
Okay, so prior to that, to get us up to the diversion rates, which we go back to, I know the diversion rate hit was in 07. It might have been in 08 that we hit the 50% level we were required to. That was not done by this board. That was done by those two private companies.
With respect, again, I have to say, we were the one, this agency, this Solid Waste Management Authority, is the one reporting to Cal Recycle. It's reporting about all of our solid waste and recycling programs, those administered by Hambro, those administered by the authority, those administered by Recology. Those are all programs of this body.
You reported on them.
We
You didn't manage the recycling. The recycling was done by those two companies.
To the extent that recycling needs to change in any way, or expand or improve, and at the behest of Cal Recycle, this body implements those changes. So part of those changes, for instance, that changed the franchise agreement in 2011 were the changes that were coming down the pike through Cal Recycle and implemented through the task force, approved by this body, and then Actually, the materials were collected by Recology and processed by Julindra. It's absolutely true. I was not the one gathering the cans and processing.
No, but Ted, I know for a fact prior to the new contract being in place, there was reluctance on the authority's staff at that point to get in the deal with Recology, it had to do, there was a whole special thing blown up with Julindra and all that thing to put some kind of recycling in place. Those bins were put out just as a freebie that Recology chose to include in their existing contract, under the old contract, not under the authority board's guidance. So let's call it what it is. Yes, 2011, we have a contract put in place. They got our diversion rate up even higher, but we hit the 50% diversion rate, not under some contract.
Still, the board is rightful to take credit for those, and CalRecycle is holding the board responsible for making sure those programs are in place.
I would respect.
Okay, I think we've got good banter back and forth, and we have this. So let's move this to, I'll entertain a motion at this time.
Can I ask a legal question?
Sir?
I hope I have the updated version of the JPA, and there's no date on it, so I'm unsure. But basically, I was going back to look for what the body of 10 had put forward, and I believe it was Commissioner Sullivan's motion. And what I see in here that was changed was this particular sentence, and I wanted to read this out at this point in time. It says, any ordinances of the governing board of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority must be approved by a majority vote of both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors before the ordinance may be adopted.
That was done.
That's the complete sentence.
Right, that was done at our 10-member board because that's the first time that I became a member of Solid Waste Authority, was the 10-member board. And we heard nothing but complaints every single month about these ordinances, and they were never passed by elected people, by elected majority. So you can look at it this way. If these get repealed, with the ordinance we have now, is every new ordinance will be approved by the Board of Supervisors and be approved by the City Council. Those are all elected officials, and we can go back and redo ordinances if we need to. That was the major argument I think Mr. Sullivan's making, that's all we heard as a 10-member board, is about these ordinances, and that they didn't like the ordinances, and they were never put on by, that anybody can be held responsible because either our City Council majority or the Board of Supervisors majority approved them.
So my question on that would be is that, again, it states that before the ordinances may be adopted. If we vote today to repeal this change that was put into this joint powers agreement, mentions nothing about repeal. It only mentions that you must be approved by a majority vote of both the City Council and the Board of Supervisors before the ordinance may be adopted. So my understanding of this sentence as written, if this is the updated version, which I believe it is that it does not mention anything regarding repeal. And so at that point, I do not, my question would be, with the putting new ones forward, that would be adopting what this says, so that would have to go before the Board of Supervisors and the City Council, but it does not mention repeal or rescind or whatever that word would be. So can this body take the vote to repeal, rescind, revoke, whatever it would be? According to...
You can only repeal an ordinance by passing an ordinance repealing a prior ordinance, so you go through the same process.
So you can always repeal an ordinance by passing another one.
No, you have to pass an ordinance.
The only way to repeal an ordinance is to pass a new ordinance that repeals the previous ordinance. So what you're looking at this moment is ordinance 2014-01. That's what we'd call a repealing ordinance. And it is an ordinance that repeals ordinance numbers 2008-01, 0203, and 2009-01. So it is actually a new ordinance. and it would have to go before the...
And Martha, just so you're
City
clarifying, this is a two-meeting process. Is that correct? Because it's an ordinance, not a resolution?
It's a two-meeting process for this board. Today, what we'd be doing is introducing the ordinance. It would then go to the city council and the board of supervisors for their approval. If they both approve, it would come back to this board for adoption.
And then upon passage of both, effectuate 30 days hence?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Wilson, are you satisfied with the answer? Are you clear?
I think so.
Okay. Well, then I'll entertain a motion at this time.
You know, I'm going to, this is kind of, I know people have been pretty adamant against removal of these. I am going to move to table this because I do want to request that, I want a formal request with a timeline for Mr. Mason as well as Mr. Taylor to get together and get these good parts of the ordinances put together. And at that point, then I would be in favor of putting the ordinance out there.
We have a second to Commissioner Sullivan's requested motion to table?
I would second that motion.
Okay, we'll take a vote on it. Any further comment from the audience on this, or we'll just go right to, oh, come on up. Yep, come on up.
Yeah, you got a public comment.
That's all. Wesley Nunn, just look for sunset timeline or deadline on the input. So it's not extended indefinitely, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion to table this until the authority can,
I would move to table it to the April meeting.
April meeting, okay. Okay, so let's take a,
Let's... The amended second?
Yeah, I'll go with that. I'll second that amendment.
okay, so let's take a vote. Karen?
Commissioner Ania?
No.
Commissioner Wilson?
No.
Commissioner Hawley?
Yes.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
And Chairman Gitlin?
No.
Okay.
Motion is defeated. I'll entertain another motion at this time to, motion to approve the ordinance to repeal 2014-01. Do we have a motion at this time?
Yes, I'll make the motion to repeal.
Do we have a second?
Second?
I think we'll go right to the vote. Everyone's had an opportunity to speak. Public sector? Okay. All right, so
No,
come on up.
motion, you go.
We have a motion and we have a second.
Can it be repealed by resolution? Is that impossible?
No,
Has to
I've
go
talked
back.
to, in my conversations with Council Rice, she says it has to be an ordinance. Is that correct, Council Rice?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and we have a second, and let's call the, go ahead for discussion at the,
What we're
Commissioner.
talking about is then is approving ordinance number 2014-01, is that
That's right.
correct? I just want to, one more time, point out that paragraph 6 says, whereas the Board of Commissioners has considered and debated the practical necessity and usefulness of the aforementioned ordinances. And I don't think at this time that's occurred yet.
With the passage of this, it would go back to the city council and to the board of supervisors, and after 2 years, it's time to move this. Am I correct that it goes back to the council
Yes.
and it goes back to the board of supervisors?
Yes.
Okay. That's the reason I'm moving it forward. 2 years is
let's call the vote. Karen?
Okay, and just to clarify, this motion is to introduce and waive the reading of the ordinance?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay, Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
Commissioner Hawley?
No?
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Ania?
Yes.
Commissioner Sullivan? Did I ask you? I'm
You already got
sorry.
me.
I've got you written down twice. I'm having problems tonight. can you
Double
tell?
votes on it.
It's Gitlin, and the answer is yes.
Chairman Gitlin, thank you.
Okay.
No, I'm just, yeah.
All right, so that motion passes by a 4-1 margin. And again, Council Rice, it's my understanding with the passage of this 2014-01, this will now be referred to the Crescent City Council and the Delaware County Board of Supervisors for their consensus on vote. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's take up 7.6, discussion possible action regarding ordinance number 2014-02 regarding flow control and franchises. And this puts back in flow control and franchises. I will ask for an explanation. Director Ward, what 2014-02?
I was not engaged in any way in the development of this ordinance, so I cannot respond very well.
Okay, 2014-02, just as it speaks. Okay, 7.6. We have the ordinance of the Board of Commissioners of Del Norte Solid Waste Authority regarding flow control and franchises. Well, I'll open it up to the board for discussion. Does anyone here have any misunderstanding of this, what this ordinance will do? It will bring back in flow control and ordinances and franchises. I'll open it to the board here.
Mr. Gitlin, I have just one quick question. Under Section 5, under exclusivity of the franchise, and this was something I was concerned about even when in withdrawing from the other ordinances, is the protections for this franchise. I see that you have A, B, and C defining what is the exclusively belongs to the franchise. But I had some questions about enforceability, and I was wondering if Council Rice would be willing to tell us what happens if someone infringes on that exclusivity.
So this is the language that's taken from the current ordinance. As far as enforcing an ordinance without an administrative citation ordinance, the two options are criminal sanction, which would be a misdemeanor and have to go through the DA's office. The other option is to go to Superior Court and request an injunction, whereby the court would be ordering the person or business to, in this case, stop violating this provision of the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds somewhat more involved than just having an administrative citation.
It's expensive.
Yes, thank you.
All right, public comment on ordinance 2014-02 regarding flow control and franchises. Mr. Nunn?
Under the assumption this motion will pass, I would request that as it's presented to the city and county, that this would be presented before the prior motion. In other words, I think this should be adopted, look at being adopted prior to asking the city and county to repeal others.
So you want to establish as numerically as this is the first, well, I'm not sure if that's possible, where we have, you're asking to put in flow control that already exists. Council Rice?
It's theoretically possible that you would end up with two ordinances that cover the same subject.
Maybe I didn't present it right.
I'm sorry, may I? What I might suggest is that's going to be up to the mayor and to the chair of the Board of Supervisors as far as the sequence.
Okay, I was just saying, it seems like procedurally it'd be right to adopt everything you want to adopt before repealing as far as presented to the city and county.
Thank you, Mr. Nunn. Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on. I'll entertain a motion 2014-02 for...
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Board discussion?
Nope. Just one comment. Even though that's under administrative citation now, that's the most basic citation you can get. The district attorney's office needs, if we have violations in the future, needs to do its job. And we will have a new DA in November.
Might have one in June, depending.
Might have one quicker that may want to do the jobs, so we don't have to go to administrative ordinances, which are barely any citation at all.
If I can also make a comment on that, the threshold is much higher for a criminal penalty. It's, beyond a reasonable doubt, whereas with an administrative citation, it's kind of like 51%,
Right.
most likely. So it's a lot
And since
less burdensome.
and we don't issue many administrative citations, so I would hope it'd be beyond a reasonable doubt. You're correct.
Okay, any other board comments at this time? All right, so we have a motion and we have a second. Karen, let's call the vote.
Commissioner Hawley?
No.
Commissioner Neal?
Yes?
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes.
And Chairman Gitlin?
That would be yes. Okay, the matter passes. Now, I will say this has been, this is kind of a milestone in history of this. We've gotten off the spot and we're making movements. And no doubt this will create additional movement with our city council and with our board of supervisors to fill in the gaps where necessary so that our code enforcement officers have all the tools necessary to do their jobs. And I hope that's what is exactly what's going to happen. So on that note, I see we have no additional issues, no items to discuss. Board, do you have any additional comments at this time?
Well, there is one item here that was handed to me, I guess the rest of you, this mid-management request for them to,
I think that's a closed session item, and we're going to go into closed session. Yeah.
It's closed session, okay.
Yeah,
I'm
we're going to
sorry.
go into closed session on that, immediately follow. So on the basis of that, we're going to go into closed session. I'm sorry.
I do have a question. I
Yes.
don't see anything closed session on our agenda.
I have to say, I apologize,
'cause
because
we
I
can't
certainly
discuss
intended to
it.
put that in, and apparently as I was editing the
Okay,
agenda,
well, in our pre-agenda meeting, I
My
thought
own
it was
fault.
set up as a closed
can't-
session because it's a personnel item,
Yeah.
but it's not indicated so we'll have to defer it to the next meeting.
Does it,
It has to be
That's
agendized.
true.
Yeah. you
I
have
just
to
wasn't
list
sure
it.
that it's a closed session item, but,
Having to do with personnel,
Okay.
as the chair, I thought it was best suited
I
as a
thought
closed
I
session.
added it.
I missed that that it wasn't indicated on here as a closed session item, so we'll move from there. Okay, our meeting is adjourned.